Well, good morning, everybody. This is Barry Jones with sphistory.com, and I am fresh off vacation and ready to rock and roll. Um, the series that we were working on before I left for vacation was World War II and why, or the reasons World War II was so significant, and some of the after effects and how things changed as a result of technology and a whole host of factors. You can go back and check out those episodes. I dropped a history or a vacation episode, just kind of touching base on all the places that we visited, some of the historical significances. And I had teased you before I left, saying that when I get back, I was going to do 3 or 4 episodes. It's going to be 4 on the hanky panky that took place directly after World War II. And some of this has its roots in my JFK series, the assassination series, and how Allen Dulles, actually the Dulles brothers, were so involved in the power elite structure of the United States, and as such, were able to affect public policy. Had the undue influence, you might say. John Foster Dulles was Secretary of State under Eisenhower, and so maybe his was not undue, but Allen Dulles is head of the eventual CIA and is involved in American intelligence as he was. These two Dulles brothers had outsized influence, to say the least, in what was going on in America here, both domestically and in international, from an international perspective. So what I wanted to begin building a case for is something that I started in my JFK assassination series when I talked about the power elites, the military industrial congressional complex, the deep state. And if you really want to go back and find out about John Foster Dulles and Allen Dulles, the roots of their power, feel free to go back and check out those episodes. This is sort of picking up where that left off. And the question is, what was JFK the only president? I mean, let me rephrase that. We found out during the JFK assassination that Allen Dulles was very much involved in the entire assassination from beginning to end. And of course, as director and former director of the CIA, his agency was very much involved. But Allen Dulles, I mean, even afterwards, serving on the Warren Commission, everywhere you looked in the JFK assassination, you cannot get away from the fingerprints of Allen Dulles. What I want to begin laying the case or building the case for today is that JFK is not the first president that Allen Dulles double-crossed. He's not the first and only president. In fact, a case could be made that in his time of public service, he never did follow to the letter the bidding of his commander-in-chief. He was always a double dealer. And it started in the aftermath of World War II, or even before World War II ended, with FDR, who, of course, by this point is in a very weakened condition. And so that's where I want to begin with Casablanca. This is a conference between Churchill and FDR. And of course, the war is not over yet, obviously, if FDR is still alive, but they are already determining. We're getting into 1943 now, and the worst part of the war is over. The worst part of the war for the Allies was 41, 42. By the time we get to 43, the Nazis are under assault in Russia. They never did get control of England like they had hoped. The Americans have landed and pushed, we've had this situation in North Africa. We landed in Sicily. We're working our way up the Italian boot. So the Nazis are fighting a two-front war. The Americans have stemmed the tide, which was at one time an avalanche coming at them in the Pacific, but they've stemmed that tide. The didn't defeat the Japanese in the Battle of Coral Sea, but they didn't lose either. And then on the heels of that, we have Midway, and then we start island hopping, and now they're playing defense, and we're working our way towards Japan. So everywhere you look, the Allies are on the march. Soviets are pushing towards Germany from the east. The Americans, the British, the French are pushing towards Germany in the west. The Americans are pushing the Japanese back in the Pacific. So everywhere you look, it's pretty clear the Allies are winning. And of course, the only chance of winning, as we learned in our last series, World War II, was for the Axis powers was to win quick. So the longer this goes on, the more advantage that the Allies have. So they're meeting in Casablanca under the guise of this knowledge that they know that they're going to win. But as opposed to World War I, where we accepted an armistice, we don't want a repeat World War. World War I was in many ways not ever really settled, which is why we had to fight World War II. They want it to be settled this time. So FDR and Churchill come out of this conference announcing to both of their governments and to all the Allies that we will accept nothing less, in this case, except unconditional surrender. No suing for peace, no armistice, unconditional surrender. In other words, we win and they lose. Kind of borrowing from Ronald Reagan's quote about the Cold War. And one of the commitments that both of these allies made to the Soviets, Stalin is our ally at this point, and he's paranoid about 2/3 of the allies meeting without him, making agreements are going to leave him out in the cold. So in order to reassure Stalin, the Americans and the British tell Stalin and the Soviets that we will not make separate peace deals with the Nazis. But this whole unconditional surrender is supposed to put to ease Stalin's fear that the Americans and the British are going to leave the Soviets hanging and do all the fighting. That we'll make our separate peace agreements with the Nazis and leave Stalin to do all the hard work. We're essentially telling him, no, that's not true. We're going to be in this to the end. And we'll accept nothing less than unconditional surrender. And on top of that, there is a commitment made by FDR and Churchill to bring the Nazi war criminals to justice. We've never really had a war crimes tribunal after a war before, where the winning side brings the losing side to justice for all war crimes that have been committed. And part of that is because we've never had war crimes committed on such scale before. And we talked about that in some of the things. The Axis powers killed 75 to 80% of all the people who died in World War II were killed by the Axis powers. And there was a very high percentage of those who were just unarmed citizens. Now, the Allies had their problems too. We killed a lot of unarmed citizens as well. So it really depends on who wins and who loses, who's determined to be a war criminal and who's not determined to be a war criminal. But then you have the Holocaust, you add that in, and that's just something that cannot be allowed to be repeated. And so the Allies are committed to bringing those war criminals to justice for sure, for targeting 6 million Jews and trying to wipe off an entire group of people in the manner in which they did. So these are some of the commitments that were made at Casablanca, and almost immediately behind FDR's back, Alan Dulles, who's in the Swiss director of the OSS. The OSS is the precursor to the CIA. CIA doesn't exist yet. Begins working behind FDR's back to do exactly what FDR promised Stalin he wouldn't do. And that is to secure a secret peace with the Nazis in Italy and protect strategic Nazis who have some semblance of strategic value from any post-war justice. In other words, Alan Dulles is doing his own thing in Italy. And there's a reason for that. And I don't have time to go into it here, but if you go back to my deep state episodes, the Dulles brothers, both John Foster and Alan, are very much involved in Sullivan and Cromwell as attorneys representing a lot of these big corporations that are, helped rebuild and helped Germany after World War I and helped basically put Hitler in power. And these are some of the biggest companies, most lucrative companies in the world, and they're located in Germany or in German territory. And the fear is now that these companies have is that their assets are going to be seized or destroyed after the war because they're going to be on the losing side. And so this is why they have attorneys at Sullivan and Cromwell to represent them in matters like this to protect them. And so Alan Dulles is conflating his role. He's got two roles. One is to be the director of the OSS in Switzerland, in that particular theater anyway, representing the United States and the Allies. And the other is as a private attorney representing these companies that are in Germany or in Nazi or fascist territories. And so he begins conflating his role as a Sullivan Cromwell lawyer with U.S. intelligence director. Now, if you remember, I made a big point in those episodes about this corporate mindset, which is called Ultra Vires. It's actual law. Ultra Vires is the principle that companies and corporations only exist for one purpose, and that is to maximize profits. They don't care about public interest. They don't care about ethics. They don't care about morals. They don't care about what's right, what's wrong. None of that matters. It's only about what will maximize profits. In fact, they have written right into the law, if a CEO does anything, takes into consideration anything other than profits while making decisions related to that corporation, he or she can be fired. It can actually be prosecuted. And so their only concern is to maximize profits. The second part of Ultra Vires is about exempting themselves from any consequences, right? They are very keen on not having any consequences for anything blow back on them. And so they write into, this is part of the reasons why they hire people in strategic jobs like Alan Dulles, who can write the rules to make sure that they are always free from any consequence, from any blowback. It's kind of like the pharmaceutical companies who have carte blanche to make any kind of vaccine they want, never have to worry about being sued because there's a law to protect them from any kind of lawsuits or civil litigation relating to their products, and so they're always sort of, it's like getting immunity. They're immune from any sort of blowback or any sort of consequence. And that's what part of Ultra Vires: maximize profits, immunize yourself from any kind of responsibility or consequence that could come back to you any way, shape, or form. So you're free to just do what you do best, and that is make money. You don't have to worry about any litigation. You don't have to worry about law. You don't have to any criminal statutes. You don't have to worry about anything. You are permanently immunized from anything and everything. So that's Ultra Vires, and where the deep state really got perverted when that Ultra Vires mindset transitioned from the private sector, corporate, into government. And then all of a sudden, government is in the business of making money, not worrying about the public interest, and immunizing itself and whoever's involved, whether it's the CEO, the board of directors, whether it's the politician, whoever is involved in any policy-making decision, they are permanently immunized from any kind of blowback. That's Ultra Vires. It's just a I don't know the word I'm looking for, but it's incredibly corrupt, incredibly corrupt. Well, anyway, these corporations are worried about what's going to happen after the war is over. They may lose, their assets may be seized, their companies may be destroyed, broken up. Some of their leaders might even get hauled off to Nuremberg. for participating. Some of these companies made Zyklon B, the gas that killed all the Jews. They had to know what it was going for. Okay. These are companies that are being represented by Sullivan Cromwell. Ergo, they're being represented by Allen Dulles. And Allen Dulles, as president, has already said we'll accept nothing less than complete unconditional surrender. We will not make separate peace deals with these people. We're going to beat them, and then we're going to hold them all accountable at a war crimes tribunal. Well, Allen Dulles begins doing his own thing to secure secret peace with these Nazis strategically, certain ones, not all, because he's thinking about what's next. And what's next is we're going to go back to being enemies with the Soviets. We always considered the Soviets to be the bigger threat in Europe, which is why we helped rebuild Germany to be a counterbalance. Then we had this war, and we had to take up arms against the Nazis. But when it's over, we're going to go back to being enemies with the Soviets, and we're going to be having to spy on them. They're going to be spying on us, and the real enemy is not going to be the Nazis anymore. It's going to be the Soviets. And so, in an effort to try to create a bulwark in Europe against the spread of communism, i.e., the Soviets, some of these Nazis, some of these people who we've been fighting in a war might prove to be useful. And if we can get them on our side and sneak them out of the country or whatever, prevent them from going over to the Soviets or prevent them from going to jail or prevent them from being hung, whatever, if we can use them on our side to provide a counterbalance to the Soviets after the war is over. And this is going to, and of course, Allen Dulles understands better than most the direction that all this is headed, and that we are going to be engaged in this new kind of war against the Soviets. A lot of it's going to be intelligence related. And so behind Hitler's back, you see what's going on here. Allen Dulles is working behind FDR's back, but at the same time, some of the most prominent Nazis are working behind Hitler's back. They see the handwriting on the wall too. They realize our days are numbered. I better make a deal while there's a deal to be made. Allen Dulles is willing, and he's a willing partner. And if I offer something, or I have something of strategic value that I can offer, I'm going to use that as leverage. I'm going to use that as some sort of currency to buy my freedom, so I don't end up at Nuremberg, so I don't end up dead when we lose this war. One of these guys was an SS general named Karl Wolff. He is pictured here. He's on the right, standing there at a concentration camp. And he begins negotiating secretly behind the scenes with Allen Dulles. Now, who is this SS General Karl Wolff? First of all, as an SS general, just forget what I'm going to tell you about the concentration camp stuff. The SS was largely in charge of all things related to the concentration camps and later the death camps. It was the SS who was put in charge by Hitler of the final solution. So anyone, especially somebody as high ranking as a general in the SS, is a war criminal. We just need to stipulate that right off the bat. His particular job was to keep the trains running to the death camps. This is one of the things that the Allies couldn't. People tell me all the time, well, what could the Allies have done to stop the concentration camps or what was going on at Dachau or Auschwitz? Well, yeah, we weren't in Germany or in Poland at that moment to stop it, but we surely could have bombed the train lines, the rail lines that was bringing all these victims, these future victims to these camps, and that would have screwed up all their plans. I mean, think about how that would have complicated what the Nazis were doing. We didn't do anything. We didn't lift a finger to help them at all. It was his job to keep these trains running. And he was also involved in some of the most diabolical medical experiments at Dachau that one could even imagine. They had, one of the reasons why Nazi medicine was so advanced was because they were using humans, as their guinea pigs. They were doing all their tests on these poor victims at Dachau, And we've all heard of Dr. Mengele and the Angel of Death and all that, and all the different twisted experiments that they were doing. It was General Karl Wolff who played a key role in setting up these medical experiments at Dachau and providing all the necessary technology and equipment and personnel, et cetera, to keep these things going. It's one of the reasons why the Nazis' medicine was so superior to everybody else's. There were these ethical objections that other countries had to using human beings as live guinea pigs. And so they had to do their testing on animals and try to figure out or extrapolate in their minds scientifically how that would apply to humans. Well, the Germans didn't have any such ethical obstacles to using humans, and so they didn't have to extrapolate. They saw exactly what happened to humans because they did all the tests on humans. This is part of that. When you get into social Darwinism and eugenics and all the stuff that was going on first in the United States and then eventually in Germany, who took it to an extreme, is that humans aren't created with any special spark from God. They're not divine creations. There's nothing unique about a human. Nothing sets it apart from an animal. In fact, that's really all they are is animals. And the way we treat animals is the way we treat humans, the way we can treat humans. There's no bridge too far that prevents you from treating humans the way you would treat animals. And so when you remove that creation, remember that was all that the whole evolution story. We talked about that and how Darwin was sent out by the British East India Company to find an alternative explanation to the creation story, so that it would give them a legal justification, a moral justification to commit genocide. And when he came back with evolution, they jumped on that. They said, now we are permitted to commit genocide. Well, it's not, it's not a big surprise, which eventually the Germans, the Nazis, take that to the next level. They begin performing these experiments on these people. And so that's what this General Karl Wolff was in charge of, these medical experiments and these concentration camps, keeping the flow of victims coming via the trains. And so this is a high value target. I remember when we were fighting in Iraq, and our government started making these playing cards with faces of high value targets in Iraq for the soldiers to have on them at all times, so that they run into them, they could capture them. And you had Saddam Hussein, he was a high value target. You had his sons, they were high value targets. You had these generals, and everybody had whose face ended up on one of these playing cards was a high value target. Well, General Karl Wolff, if we'd have had that same playing card modus operandi after World War II or at the end of World War II, he would have been one of those high value targets. But instead, because he represented something of strategic value to Allen Dulles, Dulles rescues him from certain prosecution at Nuremberg and stashes him away for future intelligence purposes, so that when the war is over and we are transitioning the OSS to the CIA, Allen Dulles is going to have a whole roster of these former Nazis who know more about the Soviets than we do, and are going to prove to be, in his mind anyway, worth the effort to save them, make a separate peace with them, and save them from prosecution for war crimes, and utilize them in the new war against the Soviets, the new intelligence war. So this is one of the guys that he saved. By the way, this whole operation is called Operation Sunrise. And sometimes they're referred to as Sunrise Nazis. Another Sunrise Nazi was SS Colonel Eugene Dullman. Obviously, we've already learned if you're in the SS and you're a high-ranking member in the SS in any way, shape, form, you are a war criminal because you are involved in the final solution. Okay, so this guy there's no doubt, there's no question, he should have been at Nuremberg. He had extensive espionage contacts in Italy and Germany. And so he is rescued by James Angleton, who is Dulles' boss, basically, uh, back in the United States. He was obviously going to end up at Nuremberg, but for future intelligence purposes, James Angleton steps in and saves SS Colonel Eugene Dahlman. So a second Sunrise Nazi. Now, I'm just going to go through a few here. Another one is Richard Galen. Now, this one is Hitler's intelligence chief in Russia. You talk about a plum. This guy represents, whoever can get hit. This is an intelligence bonanza. Whoever can get Richard Galen. So obviously he's a former Nazi, has an entire staff that he's been over, and he's recruited by Dulles to head the intelligence in West Germany after the war. For which time he serves 23 years in this new CIA, retires with honors from the CIA in 1968, and lived in a lakeside estate, sailed his sailboat, all paid for by the CIA. Now, I keep putting in parentheses here, Ultra Vires. The reason I mention this is because this is another example where Ultra Vires has made its way into the United States government. Remember now, Ultra Vires was this corporate. It was a private industry. This was not the public. It started off as in the private sector. Okay, these corporations, and written right into their bylaws, their CEOs had one responsibility, and that was to maximize profits. And they were immunized from anything and everything, any decision they made that could later come back and haunt them. They were immunized from any liability. As long as it could be argued, whatever decision they made was in the pursuit of profits. And if they ever did make a decision, it was worse for a CEO to take the public interest into consideration when making a decision than it was for a CEO to do something highly illegal, highly unethical, highly immoral, highly wrong. As long as he could argue it was in the interest of profits, he was okay. He was immunized. But if he ever did anything in interest of public interest, he ever made a decision with public interest in mind, he lost that immunity and he could be fired. All kinds of bad things happened to him. So you see how twisted that is. And when our corporations through World War I, World War II became intricately involved in our government, and FDR, for example, brought in a bunch of the highest ranking private sector people to run the government, that ultra vires mindset integrated itself into our government. And now here you see Alan Dulles and James Angleton are making decisions. They're saying, well, it's not about profit necessarily, but it's about United States intelligence after the war being able to compete with or defeat the Soviets. Anything goes. There is no moral or ethical obstacle to bringing these former Nazis. These guys are responsible for the death of 6 million Jews. They're responsible for war crimes. They're incomprehensible. They're responsible for these medical experiments, torture. They should hang at the end of a noose. But no, they serve a purpose. And so we're going to save them against the orders of our commander-in-chief, who's saying they're all going to go to Nuremberg, and against the orders of our commander-in-chief saying we're not supposed to make any separate peace agreements with any of these Nazis or any of these enemies that we've been fighting in the war. We're going to make separate peace with them. We're going to save them from Nuremberg, and we're going to bring them back to the United States or employ them in our intelligence operation going forward in our continuing war against the Soviets. And we're going to pay them. They're going to be on our payroll. They're going to be our guys now. They were Hitler's guys. Now they're going to be our guys. And of course, he's doing all this in an underhanded way. And it's not just Alan Dulles. Angleton's involved as well. And so they create these, what we call rat lines. There's a great book on this, Everything I'm Telling You, by David Talbot. And it's called Devil's Chessboard. I've got it pictured here. So if you want to get the story in detail, read the Devil's Chessboard. It really lays it out for you. These rat lines are sort of like, you remember the old Underground Railroad in America, where Harriet Tubman and others helped slaves escape south into the north, and it was called the Underground Railroad. Well, this is the same principle. They're trying these Nazi war criminals who are on high value targets. They're going to be sent to Nuremberg as soon as the war ends, are making separate peace deals with Allen Dulles and James Angleton. And these two guys, Allen Dulles and James Angleton, are helping these Nazi war criminals escape through a series of secret passageways and safe houses, which becomes like an underground railroad for Nazis. And they've made these deals with Dulles and Angleton in exchange for their freedom and in exchange for immunity from all the criminal war crimes that they've committed, they will now be on our payroll working for us. This is ultra vires. We're maximizing the benefit of these war criminals. And of course, it's not in the public interest. The public interest be damned. Public interest doesn't even matter in this. Moral considerations don't matter. Ethical considerations don't matter. None of that comes into play at all. What's right doesn't matter. Even what the president wants doesn't matter. It's about intelligence going forward. These guys only care about what is to come as far as intelligence is concerned, and doing their job after the war is over to prevent the spread of communism, to fight the KGB, et cetera, to spy. And so we're going to maximize the benefit that these war criminals provide, whether it's in the public interest or not. Clearly, it's not. So we create these rat lines. So here is an example, and I'm going to go through a couple, examples of what they ignored in order to make this happen. It's not like Allen Dulles and James Angleton and anyone else involved in this were oblivious and didn't know and did this out of ignorance. They were fully aware of what these people that they were saving, what they were involved in, what they were doing. They just didn't care. They just didn't care. So Edward Schult, pictured here, a German informant, was at one time the chief executive of a German mining company. And he hand-delivered evidence of what was going on at Auschwitz in a face-to-face meeting he had with Allen Dulles in 1943. So right when all of this is happening, Edward Schult, who is in a position to know, he's head of one of these big companies. A lot of these, the reason he would know is because the German mining company was using a lot of these workers from Auschwitz to do the dirty work in their mines. And so he was fully aware where his labor force was coming from and what the conditions were there and what was happening to these people. And so he hand delivers this evidence. He must have had a crisis of conscience or something. When he hands delivers Auschwitz evidence, that means he's got documents. Okay, he's got a story to tell, but he's also got evidence. And he gives it to Allen Dulles in a meeting, a face-to-face meeting in 1943. Another informant, Fritz Colby, German Foreign Service official who refused to join the Nazi Party. This guy, boy, you talk about someone who stood his ground throughout. You had a lot of people who changed their mind at the end. But this guy refused to join the Nazi Party back when everybody in Germany was joining the Nazi Party. And you had a few stalwarts like this guy who stood against all that. And anyway, he smuggles final solution documents to Allen Dulles over an 8-month period, 1944. So first you have, you've got the head of this German mining company, Edward Schult, giving evidence of Auschwitz and what's going on there to Allen Dulles in 43. And then the very next year, Fritz Colby, who has all the gravitas and credibility of someone who stood up to Hitler when no one else in the world was standing up to him, giving final solution documents. This is where they met at Wannsee, the high-ranking SS and high-ranking Nazis, to come up with, okay, we're not killing Jews fast enough. How can we turn this into an engineering project where we kill them faster and get rid of the evidence just as fast. And that's where they came up with the gas and the crematoriums. And it's all documented. And so he hands these documents over to Allen Dulles in 1944. And still, Dulles continues with this Operation Sunrise, sneaking out these guys that are participating in all this. And it gets worse. Rudolph Verba and Alfred Wetzler actually escaped from Auschwitz in 1944 and had written down everything they'd seen at the camp and put it in the form of a report, which made it to Allen Dulles in 1944. So they were firsthand witnesses to what was happening. And they drew the layout of the camp. They drew where the gas chambers were and the trains and how the trains came in, what time they came in, how many train loads per day, where these guys were being sent to work, where they lived, where the crematoriums were, where the bodies were, everything. And it wasn't just Auschwitz, Birkenau as well. They had everything laid out because they were there. So again, Allen Dulles is made aware through in three different occasions, on three different occasions in 1943, 1944, 1944, by people who knew. One was the owner of a company who was involved in using camp workers for their mines. One was a sort of a resistor to join the Nazi party and had documentation of the final solution. And two were they were camp runaways who'd been there and written everything down. And they got all these documents. All four of these people got all these documents together and fed them to Allen Dulles. So Allen Dulles has no excuse. Look at his response in all three of these occasions. His response to Schult. He asked Schult to write a memo on the state of the German nation. So after he meets in this face-to-face meeting, and Schult gives him this evidence of what's going on at Auschwitz, he says, I need a report on the state of the German nation. Because he wasn't concerned about Hitler's victims. He was concerned about Hitler's people and what their perception of the war was and what they felt about their leader at that time. In other words, he just completely changed the subject. And he says, okay, I appreciate all this. Now, if you'll do this for me and give me a report on the German people, I'll take care of this other thing, but I need you to do this thing. So he just completely dismissed it. And of course, this is Ultra Vires. Max, he already made his decision. These people, I know they're scoundrels, that they're going to be they've been Hitler's scoundrels. Now they're going to be our scoundrels. I know morally, ethically, from a right and wrong perspective, and I know what my order from my commander in chief, I know all those things. I don't really care about all those things because they represent an advantage for us, some sort of benefit. So we're going to use them. And I don't want to know. I'm like, hear no evil, see no evil. I don't want to know all the bad things that these folks have been up to. I don't want to know. I'm going to use them anyway. The decision's already been made. And then his response to Fritz Colby was, instead of reporting on the fate of the Jews or recommending the bombing of the rail lines, which had been a very easy thing for the Americans to do, we controlled the skies at that point. Dulles reports to FDR that communists were gaining strength in Germany. Now, how he got, Colby's the one who came to him with the documentation of the final solution. And you see what Dulles does every time. He deflects. He takes whatever they're bringing, nods, okay, thank you, and then goes in a completely new direction. He tells Schult, give me a report on Hitler's people. Schulte's just given him this stunning information about what's going on at Auschwitz. And Dulles just ignores it. He says, it's as if that never even happened. And then Colby gives him this information on the final solution, the documents that say, hey, here's how we're going to turn this into a factory system. We're going to assembly line the whole process of killing people. We're going to genocide 6 million people. Here's how we're going to do it and get rid of the evidence. And instead of reporting that to FDR, he goes on some rant about how the communists were gaining strength in Germany. You can see what Alan Dulles is most concerned with. It's communism. He's in his mind, he's already switched gears. Fascists are no longer the real enemy because we're beating them. The real enemy is what's coming next, and that's communists. And these guys are going to be, again, a benefit to us in fighting communism. So regardless of moral implications or anything else, the decision's been made. And then his response to Verba and Wetzler is he sends a routine cable to Cordell Hull. Cordell Hull is the Secretary of State, and he is, for lack of a better way of describing him, he's an anti-Semite. He's the guy who told FDR to say no to the St. Louis. You remember the St. Louis story that came early in the war, fully loaded with Jews looking for some sort of refuge. They went to Florida, and FDR said no. They went to Cuba. Cuba said no. They come back to Florida. FDR says no again. They end up back in Germany, and most of them end up dying in concentration camps. And so here is an effort by Jews to come to the United States early in the war. And because of Cordell Hull, who advised FDR, we said no. We were more worried about offending Hitler early in the war, before he was our enemy. We were more worried about offending him by taking refugees from his country than we were about these people who were fleeing for their lives. And so the guy who advised FDR on this was Cordell Hull. So this is who Dulles is sending a cable to, and basically passing along the information that he's just gotten from Verba and Wetzler to Cordell Hull, which is like, passing information to Heinrich Himmler, the guy pictured in the first slide meeting with Schult. He's in charge of the SS. He's in charge of all the concentration camps. He's sort of the guy in charge of the final solution. I mean, passing anything sympathetic to the cause of the Jews to an anti-Semite is going to result in nothing, which is, of course, Dulles' whole point. He understands this is going down a black hole. So I bring up all this to set the stage for what's fixing to happen. This is Operation Sunrise. A lot of people don't know about Operation Sunrise. A lot of people are not aware of the double dealing that Alan Dulles was involved in before JFK. A lot of people know about the double dealing Alan Dulles did from 60 to 63, working behind JFK's back. And even after that, with respect to the Warren Commission, a lot of people don't realize that this is his character. This is who he is. He's doing this with FDR, and of course, FDR won't live a lot longer, and he'll be followed up by Truman, and then he'll be followed up by Eisenhower, and then he'll be followed up by JFK. You can find cases where Alan Dulles and his brother John Foster and Angleton, all these folks, worked behind the scenes to pull the strings like Geppetto with Pinocchio. And the presidents are sort of, they may come out like FDR did with these grand statements about unconditional surrender and trials for war criminals. But behind the scenes, guys like Alan Dulles, the operators, the ones who are putting these policies into place, are working behind their back doing the exact opposite. And as long as he was successful in getting away with it, he gets away with Operation Sunrise. All right. And tomorrow we're going to start talking about Operation Paperclip. And he succeeds with that as well. That's the follow-up to Operation Sunrise. And as long as he gets away with it, and then during Eisenhower's reign, some people call that the golden days, or the heyday of the CIA. And Alan Dulles, he got away with everything he wanted. Anything he wanted, he got. We want to invade Iran. We want to overthrow Iran's government. All right. We want to overthrow Guatemala. All right. We want to build the infrastructure to overthrow what's going on in Cuba. All right. Anything he got. It wasn't until Kennedy started standing up to him that all of a sudden he ran into somebody who said no. And then he becomes a threat. But FDR was in the last throes of his presidency, last days of his life, basically. He was no threat. Truman didn't know what he didn't know. He wasn't a threat. Eisenhower picked John Foster Dulles to be the Secretary of State, picked Dulles, Allen Dulles, to be the head of the CIA. Those were his guys. So they got everything they wanted. JFK inherited all that. And so it's a mistake to think that Allen Dulles suddenly became a double dealer when JFK became president. He was a double dealer from the get-go. And difference was for the presidents prior to JFK, he got away with it. And when JFK became president, he finally ran into somebody who knew who he was and realized what he was up to, and eventually fired him. All right, so that is Operation Sunrise, and I hope I've built a little bit of a case to show the double dealing of Allen Dulles in particular. I focused on Allen Dulles. Obviously, James Angleton was involved. Allen Dulles couldn't do anything without the permission of James Angleton. He was his boss. So they were both involved in the JFK assassination as well. Whenever you look at Lee Harvey Oswald was moved around and basically a caricature of he was put together by James Angleton. That was his role in it. He created the patsy, and Allen Dulles was, you go back and watch some of the episodes I did on the deep state and CIA and all its involvement with the JFK assassination. And whenever I refer to the CIA, I'm basically talking about Allen Dulles. So, this is a double dealer from the word go. Operation Sunrise was a direct repudiation of Casablanca. FDR and Churchill, the Allies, made a commitment to each other, a commitment to all their allies, including Joseph Stalin and the Soviets. We will not make separate peace deals with these fascists, with the Germans, the Italians, the Japanese. All for one for all. We're all going to rise or sink together. And they're all going to face justice afterwards in these war crimes tribunals. And that was the commitment we made. Behind the scenes, Allen Dulles was already double dealing. And he did so with the full knowledge of what these war criminals that he was getting off the hook, what they were involved in, what they were responsible for, what they were guilty of. He didn't care. That's Ultra Vires transitioning from the private sector into government. It's all about what benefit they provide. It's not about morals. It's not about right or wrong. It's not about ethics. It's not even about what the public policy is that your president has established, your commander in chief. It's what I think benefits us the most. All the rest of it be damned. And it certainly doesn't matter what the public thinks or what the public interest is. All right, that's episode 1, I believe, 18. And we'll title this one Operation Sunrise. Tomorrow we will begin Operation Paperclip, and that will be a 3-part series. Check out my website, sphistory.com. Feel free to give me a thumbs up and maybe leave a comment. Also, feel free to share this with anybody who some of you think might be interested. And I will leave in the comment section all the links to my other social media, and also an invitation to join the next micro class, which is coming up next week. And I will announce the topic on that, but it will be coming up next week. And so if you're interested in that, feel free to go to the directions will be the same. Just go to my website, click on the micro class tab, and the registration is pretty easy to understand. Just follow the directions. Thank you. Everybody have a great day.